Think about the one urban legend that just absolutely terrified you as a kid. I mean, maybe it was the idea of Bloody Mary waiting in the dark bathroom mirror.
Oh,
Or,
or the hook-handed killer, right, scraping his weapon against the side of a parked car.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Or like the murderer hiding in the back seat, just waiting for you to look in the rearview mirror. And you probably knew, logically, that it wasn't real.
But you still checked the back seat
You
anyway.
still checked. You still avoided looking in the mirror with the lights off. And, it makes you wonder why. What is it about these specific stories that completely short circuits our rational brains?
Well, it really comes down to how these stories are built. I mean, they operate on a completely different psychological frequency than, say, a standard ghost story or a fairy tale.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today. Looking at the massive, frankly fascinating stack of sources you've shared with us for this deep dive, we are pulling from a wildly eclectic mix.
Yeah, it's quite the pile.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, we've got everything from a catalog of late-night internet cryptids to some very high-level academic literary analysis.
Yeah.
And our mission today isn't to just, sit here and debunk spooky stories.
Right, we aren't just listing monsters.
Exactly. We are looking at how these legends function as the modular building blocks of our modern anxieties.
Yeah.
They're literally the literary DNA for the cultural fears that keep us up at night.
And the sources give us a really vital definition to start with. Urban legends are modern folklore, but with one critical distinction: they are designed to circulate as true.
Which is huge.
It is, because in a fairy tale, the social contract is established the second you hear, once upon a time. That phrase signals to your brain that you are entering a fantasy.
Like you're safe.
Right. But an urban legend demands the opposite. It demands to be taken as fact, which requires a completely different kind of engagement from the listener.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because knowing what these stories are is one thing, but understanding the delivery mechanism, like how they bypass our modern critical thinking skills, is something else entirely.
Yeah, the mechanics are fascinating.
And the sources highlight a specific narrative device, right? The friend of a friend narrator, the FOAF. And when I read this, it struck me as kind of like a form of psychological money laundering.
Psychological money laundering, I like that.
Hear me out. You take this wildly unbelievable, almost absurd narrative that's the dirty money. If a stranger walked up to you and said a phantom hitchhiker vanished from their passenger seat, you'd reject it immediately.
Sure, you'd think they were crazy.
Right. But if you wash that unbelievable event through a trusted, legitimate institution, like your best friend who heard it from their cousin, who works with the guy it happened to.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Yeah. By the time the story reaches you, the absurdity has been scrubbed away. It's like a modern buffer of belief. Your intellectual defenses are lowered because you aren't evaluating the ghost anymore. You're evaluating your trust in your friend.
That is actually a remarkably accurate way to look at it. And if we, pull back and look at classical literature, this exact mechanism has been used for centuries.
Really, like structurally.
Oh, absolutely. In literary analysis, this is known as a framed narrative.
So like a story nested inside another story.
Yes. Take Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
We don't actually begin the book with Victor Frankenstein hunched over a laboratory table reanimating dead tissue.
Right, that would be like way too much too fast.
Exactly. It would be asking too much of the reader right out of the gate. Instead, we start with Captain Walton, this grounded, rational explorer writing letters to his sister about a strange man he rescued on the ice.
Oh, wow.
And then that man tells Walton the story. Or look at Henry James in The Turn of the Screw, where the narrative begins with people gathered around a fire reading a manuscript written by someone else entirely.
Okay, so by putting distance between the author and the supernatural event, the writer creates that exact buffer of belief.
Precisely. It allows the reader to safely suspend their disbelief because they are simply being asked to believe that someone else experienced it.
So modern horror writers are basically just weaponizing an ancient trick.
Yeah, they really are.
Because the sources specifically mention the author, Stephen Graham Jones, looking at novels like The Only Good Indians. And he uses this communal, almost gossipy voice to ground his supernatural threats.
Which is incredibly effective.
It is. It feels like you're just sitting in a living room hearing local rumors and the supernatural elements just slide right past your defenses.
Well, because human beings are evolutionarily wired to share survival information in exactly that format. If someone says, a guy my brother knows went down that unmarked road and never came back, our brains prioritize that as safety data.
Wow. We log it as a warning, not as fiction.
Exactly.
Which explains why this net catches such a bizarre variety of things. I
Yeah.
mean, looking at the catalog in your materials, it's staggering. You've got cryptids like Bigfoot or the Mothman,
Yeah.
and then cursed objects like the Dybbuk box, that haunted wine cabinet that went viral on eBay.
Oh, right.
And then you have these supernatural rituals like Hanako-san, the ghost haunting the school bathroom in Japanese urban legends. And the sources explicitly note that these stories are almost entirely immune to debunking.
They are immune because they rely on deep emotional resonance rather than factual accuracy.
What do you mean by that?
Take the Dybbuk box. You can present someone with overwhelming evidence articles, interviews, confessions, proving it was a modern fabrication designed to drive up an auction price.
Which it was.
Right. But the story feels emotionally plausible. The underlying idea that human grief or trauma or evil could somehow seep into and become trapped within a mundane physical object that resonates with how we experience memory.
So the debunking fails because it attacks the facts, while the legend has already entrenched itself in the emotion.
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, so if this friend of a friend money laundering structure is the Trojan horse that gets past our logic gates, we have to look at the cargo. Like, what exactly is the message hidden inside once they take root in our heads?
Well, surprisingly, they're incredibly conservative.
Really?
Yeah, beneath all the jump scares, urban legends basically act as strict, unspoken rule books for society. They are cautionary tales designed to punish very specific transgressions.
Okay, the sources refer to this as the hookman logic. Can we break down what that actually means in practice?
Sure, so the Hookman is perhaps the most famous American urban legend. A young couple parks their car in a remote area known as Lover's Lane.
Classic setup.
Right. They hear a radio report about an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand. The girl gets frightened, demands to go home. The boy speeds off in frustration.
And when they get home,
When they arrive safely, they find a bloody hook hanging from the car door handle.
a near miss.
But look at who is being targeted here. The Hookman isn't a random monster. He is a behavioral fence.
And a behavioral fence.
Yes. He targets teenagers engaging in premarital intimacy, defying curfews, and isolating themselves from the safety of the community. The story is quite literally designed to police adolescent rebellion.
Oh, wow.
If you break the social contract, whether through sexuality, wandering off the lit path, or ignoring the wisdom of the group, the legend serves as the mechanism that punishes you.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I completely understand the concept of a behavioral fence. But the way we build those fences, the actual architecture of where the horror takes place, has completely evolved.
It has.
Think about the classic ancient folklore trope of the forbidden room, like the Bluebeard story, where the young bride can go anywhere in the castle, but she absolutely must not open that one specific door.
Right.
That makes sense to me. The threat isn't an ancient castle or a dark forest. But how did we get from a medieval castle to being terrified of a VHS tape in the ring, or a microwave, or a website? Why the shift in geography?
It's a shift from the Gothic tradition to what we call domestic horror.
Domestic horror.
Yeah. In the Gothic tradition, the horror relies on grand isolation. You are trapped in a decaying mansion, a remote monastery, or the deep, dark woods. The threat is external and geographically distant.
Okay.
But as society modernized and urbanized, the dark woods were paved over. The fears had to migrate. They moved into liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces.
Yeah.
Meaning spaces of transition.
Yes. A liminal space is a threshold. It's a 24-hour laundromat at 2 in the morning. It's an anonymous hotel hallway, an empty parking garage, or the interior of a car on a lonely stretch of highway.
Places you pass through, not places you live.
Exactly. They are inherently isolating, even when they are situated right in the middle of a densely populated city.
Which perfectly explains the killer in the back seat. The danger isn't out in the woods anymore. It's literally inside your own vehicle, hidden in that transition space between your workplace and your driveway.
And this brings us right back to Bloody Mary or Hanako-san. Why a school bathroom or a home bathroom?
Because it's a liminal space.
Because a bathroom mirror is the ultimate everyday liminal space. You are alone, vulnerable, staring at an inversion of your own reality.
That is so creepy.
And the sources highlight author Shirley Jackson as the absolute master of dragging horror into these intimate spaces.
Oh, yeah.
In works like The Lottery or We Have Always Lived in the Castle,
Yeah.
she doesn't use castles or vampires. She takes everyday neighborhood rumors, the mundane, suffocating gossip of small-town life, and distills it into sheer existential dread.
And it is infinitely scarier. Because if the monster lives in a spooky castle on a hill, That's an easy fix. I just won't go to the castle, problem solved.
Exactly.
But if the curse is attached to my kitchen appliance or my bathroom mirror or my phone, I still have to use those things tomorrow morning. Domestic horror turns the safety of the mundane environment into a trap.
It colonizes your everyday life. You can close a Gothic novel and feel safe in your bedroom. You
Yeah.
cannot escape domestic horror because you are already living inside the setting.
But this raises a huge problem for modern storytellers, doesn't it? If these legends are essentially just cautionary tales with strict geographical rules, what happens when the audience figures out the blueprint?
What do you mean?
I mean, if I pick up my phone right now and a spooky, raspy voice asks, "Have you checked the children?" I already know the call is coming from inside the house.
Right.
I've seen the movies.
Yeah.
I know the trope. We're incredibly desensitized to this. So how can an author possibly use these legends effectively when we all know the punchline?
That is the defining challenge of modern horror. And the solution, according to the literary analysis and the sources, is that the best writers don't just use these legends anymore. They break them.
They break them.
They take the expected script, the blueprint you are so familiar with, and violently subvert it to shock the reader. The sources use the author Carmen Maria Machado as a prime example, specifically her collection, Her Body and Other Parties.
Oh, I love her work. But how exactly does she break the blueprint? Let's use a specific example.
Sure, take the classic licked ham story.
Yeah. Oh, that one.
Yeah, so the traditional setup relies on a linear jump scare, right? A young girl is home alone. She gets frightened by a noise in the dark. She reaches her hand down on her bed and her loyal dog licks it, providing comfort.
Right. And then the next morning, she finds the dog dead in the bathroom with a note scrawled on the mirror saying, "Humans can lick too."
Exactly. Which is terrifying when you're 12 at a sleepover.
Totally.
But it's totally hollow as an adult because the horror is purely external. It's just a monster hiding under the bed. But when Machado takes a trope like that, she shifts the entire mechanism of the fear.
How so?
She doesn't just want to startle you. She infuses the story with deep feminist subtext and surrealism.
So the horror changes from a physical threat to a psychological one.
Exactly. The story mutates so that the horror isn't the monster itself. The horror is the feeling of having your safe, private sanctuary violated by something pretending to be a source of comfort. The lick stops being a cheap jump scare and becomes an insidious violation of trust and bodily autonomy. It basically mirrors the very real-world fear of gaslighting, where the protagonist is told everything is fine, her trusted companion is right there, but her reality is fundamentally unsafe.
That is brilliant. By subverting the trope, the legend becomes a metaphor reflecting the complex, systemic anxieties of modern society.
Exactly.
Wow. So she takes this familiar shape that we think we understand, and once we let our guard down, she replaces the core message with something vastly more deeply unsettling. And, that ties into another concept from the sources that completely threw me, the metastory.
Ah, yes, the metastory is fascinating.
Can you explain that a bit?
It explores the terrifying premise that the act of believing in the legend is what actually gives it physical power. The story itself becomes the antagonist.
Wait, so by talking about the legend, the characters are literally conjuring it into existence. There's a term for that in paranormal circles, right? Where a collective thought becomes a physical entity.
You're referring to a tulpa.
Yeah.
It's a concept originating in Tibetan mysticism, a being or object that is created through sheer spiritual or mental discipline alone. In the context of the metastory, collective cultural belief acts as the engine that manifests the monster.
That is so wild.
The sources actually point to Clive Barker's story, The Forbidden, which was adapted into the film Candyman.
Right. The monster in Candyman isn't just a guy with a hook who happens to haunt a housing project.
Precisely. He exists because the community tells stories about him. Their collective fear, their shared trauma and whispered rumors literally serve as the battery that powers his physical reality.
So if they stop believing, he ceases to exist.
Exactly. The sources also highlight Stephen King's It. Pennywise the clown isn't just a random alien hiding in a sewer. He is the literal physical manifestation of the town of Derry's collective moral decay, their generational trauma, and their willingness to look the other way when terrible things happen.
Monster is their silence made flesh.
Beautifully put, yes.
And this concept of a thought form, of belief granting reality, brings us right to the digital age. Because if collective belief is the battery, the internet is the ultimate power grid.
It really is an accelerator.
What's wild to me in the materials is this paradox. The internet acts as an incredibly fast, ruthless debunking machine, but simultaneously, it is the most efficient legend-spreading apparatus in human history.
It's a perpetual arms race of information. Historically, as the sources document, we had early message boards like alt.folklore.urban, the hoaxbusters, and eventually platforms like Snopes.
Right.
Today, the moment a story pops up on your feed about a gang initiation involving flashing headlights, you can verify it's a hoax in 3 seconds.
But those 3 seconds are apparently too slow, because while a debunker is writing their article, legends like Carmen Winstead or the elevator game are spreading to millions of people.
Yes.
For those who don't know, the elevator game is this incredibly intricate internet legend where if you press the buttons in a specific ritualistic sequence in an empty elevator, it supposedly transports you to another dimension.
A digital age ritual.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the sources point out that this is where creepypasta comes in as the modern evolution of the urban legend.
Creepypasta is unique because it is crowdsourced folklore. It's internet native. Unlike the old days where a story of the Hookman might mutate slowly over a decade as it traveled by word of mouth from Ohio to Florida.
Right, like playing a massive game of telephone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a creepypasta evolves globally in real time. The community actively gains real-world believers. They participate, they add to the lore, they write fake police logs, they Photoshop images to make the impossible look entirely mundane.
Slender Man is the perfect example of this. It started on a comedy forum as a literal Photoshop contest.
Yeah.
The creator acknowledged it was fiction,
Right.
but the community grabbed it, and it gathered so much narrative momentum, so much collective belief and participation, that it crossed the barrier from a digital campfire story into actual tragic real-world consequences. It's the meta-story happening in real life. The belief gave it power.
Which forces us to ask, if these stories are no longer just oral traditions, but massive digitally synthesized narratives, what does that say about our current cultural anxieties?
That's a great question.
If the Hookman punished teenagers for going to Lover's Lane, what are the new transgressions these modern legends are punishing?
Well, looking at things like the elevator game or dark web creepypastas, it seems like they are punishing our reliance on the digital world itself.
Exactly.
The old legends punished you for wandering into the dark woods. The new legends punish you for clicking the wrong link, for digging too deep into an internet rabbit hole, or for blindly trusting the screen in front of you.
The behavioral fence has moved.
Yeah.
The warning has shifted from don't talk to strangers on the road to don't trust the avatar on your screen. We are basically policing our vulnerability in a hyper-connected world.
So what does this all mean? When you look at this entire stack of sources, from the historical cataloging of internet cryptids to the deep literary analysis of how authors bend these tropes, the through line is incredibly clear.
It really is.
Urban legends are not just silly rumors. They aren't just chain letters. They are the architectural blueprints of our cultural anxieties.
Absolutely.
Whether it is a friend of a friend laundering a fake medical remedy to bypass your logic, or an author like Shirley Jackson giving a masterclass in making your own bathroom mirror terrifying, these stories exist to force us to confront what we value and what we fear. They are the maps we draw of the darkness so we can try to navigate our way safely through it.
They are deeply functional, and they always adapt to the times. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on where we find ourselves at this exact moment.
Okay, remember it.
We've established that urban legends historically evolved to warn us about new frontiers, the deep woods, the isolation of a modern highway, and recently, the anonymity of the early internet.
Right.
But what will the urban legends of the AI and deepfake era look like a decade from now?
Oh, wow.
We are rapidly approaching a point where we can no longer trust the video proof of our own eyes, let alone the word of a friend of a friend. When reality itself becomes synthesizable, how will our modern folklore adapt to scare us next?
That is chilling. Because if fear is a house we're constantly building, and these stories are the blueprints, it feels like we are about to hand the drafting pencil over to a machine that doesn't even know what it means to be afraid.
Yeah.
And that might be the scariest blueprint of all.